Chapter 6, number 10, Hilchos Deios. Lo yidaber aleim elo rakos. You should speak to them softly. Lo yin hog ben elo min kovod. And whatever way you deal with them, it's always in the most honorable way. Lo yachiv gufam bavoda. You shouldn't pain them physically with any type of work. V'liba midvarim koshim. And emotionally, confronting him or dealing with them in a very tough way, which you cause them to be distressed. Look, a person's an orphan, and he applies for a job that he has to dig ditches. Is that called? You shouldn't paint their bodies. I mean, if you want the job, he's a ditch digger, dig ditches. It means yachav means cause undue pain to the body, unnecessary pain. But if the job calls for great amount of effort, physical effort, to succeed in that area, and he agrees to it, you're not causing him pain. We're talking about undue pain or undue stress. The yochos al mamonim yosim mimono atzmo. You should be concerned for their assets, for their belongings, more than for your own belongings. What causes them, like, bites into them? Maknito means, or you anger them. You agitate them, you anger them, or hichiv lohen, or you cause them undue pain, or rodaben, you lord it upon them. Meaning, like you took control over his life, the way you take control over a slave. Or ovad mamonam, or you cause them a financial loss, where you have no right. Hareze oved losase, you're in violation of negative commandment. The koshkim hamakosan, somebody physically, actually, you have no right to hit them. Or makalon, you curse them. You're not permitted to curse any Jew. You're not permitted to hit any Jew. You're in violation of negative commandment. But they especially, of course, this is compounded because you're abusing the orphan. Although this negative commandment one is not subject to lashes, but the punishment, the liability is explicit in the Torah. What is that? You will enrage my wrath, and I will kill you by the sword. The end of that person will not be good. Bris Kores Lohen, God entered into a covenant with the orphans and the widows. Mishama Voyo one who willed existence, entered into a covenant with them. Whenever they cry out to me, due to being victimized, I will respond. Shenemar kibtzog yitzak Eloi. If they will cry out to me, Shemo eshma tzakoso, I will listen to his outcry. Other people takes a while. With them, there'll be an immediate reaction. Immediate. B'medvar murim bisman inosan letzorch atzmo. That's only if you inflicted pain upon them. Well, you did it. You're the beneficiary. You did it for your own reason. Avol inosam harav. What about if a person's an orphan and the teacher, the Rebbe, to motivate the child, sometimes has to employ corporal punishment or has to do certain things, has to speak sternly to the child, can't speak softly. Kedei lamdan Torah, for the sake of teaching him Torah, or umnis, or to teach him a trade, which you're offering a service, and the child is unruly, not focused, and the only way you could get his attention, so he's going to be the beneficiary of this level of deportment. Olalichon b'derech yishoro, they're going to a wayward direction. Harezev mut, it's permitted. You have to confine the child. He's going with not good friends. He's taking a path which ultimately he's going to become corrupted, and you have to rein in on him. and someone use force, physical force to stop him, since there it's in the child's best interest or the youth's best interest. But nevertheless, even in that context, you do it differently, that they understand they're being treated differently. Whatever way you could do it, although the objective is the same objective, you have to be more sensitive with them than with an ordinary child. God will take up that fight. When you're fighting with them, you dispute with them, you engage them in a way where you're abusing them. God says, I will take up that fight. And if God gets involved, you don't match. We spoke about, what about, let's say he's only orphaned from the father, but he has a mother, or he has a father, he has no mother. In either case, the child is bereft, a child needs a mother and a father. That's a balance. What the mother provides, the father can't provide. What the father provides, the mother can't provide. So a balanced child, the normal upbringing is you have both parents. If one of the parents are not there, he's deficient emotionally, mentally. There's a certain degree of insecurity because of that. Even though the father may compensate, but as much as he compensates, the father cannot be a mother and a father, as much as he tries to be. But how, to what degree, to what age does a child retain this classification of an orphan? And all these that we need this extra degree of sensitivity towards this child? Meaning this, they become totally self-sufficient, independent, earning wise, everywhere wise. Nobody has to mentor them. They're fully mentored. They're fully independent, and nobody has to deal with they can deal with their own issues. Whatever he has to do, he's fully independent, fully functional. No different than any other adult. Makes no difference. Once he becomes fully independent, functional, self-sufficient, then he assumes the status of an ordinary Jew. And whatever applies to an ordinary Jew, although he's an orphan father, mother from both, that level of sensitivity has no relevance to this person any different than any other Jew. Unfortunately, unless a person is an exceptional person, really quality person, when you see somebody who's less than you, and you're able to somehow flex your muscle, and he's the object of you flexing your muscle to inflate your ego, very often people naturally, they'll more easily take advantage of that person who's cannot fend for himself than a person who can fend for himself. He's an orphan. He doesn't have to be treated specially. You don't have to give him his due. Whatever you give him is enough. Wrong is wrong, and right is right. Why do you treat the person who has the parent who can stand up for him when he can't fend for himself? Why do you treat him differently than the orphan? To the contrary, the orphan is more helpless, more needy. You should be more sensitive to him, but that's not the way people behave. It's like, when they speak about criminals, who do they victimize? They read body language very well. They see a person walking down the street, confident, upright, physically he's in good shape, and he walks with confidence. That's not the person. If the criminal has no choice, he'll victimize that person. But if sees a person who's walking, moping, down, seems to be much more vulnerable, that's the person's going to attack. An orphan naturally has certain predilections, but you notice, like, the certain person's a bachelor. Person, you see him, he's 55 years old, and just from his body language, the way he talks, the way he behaves, the way he eats, some of his finickiness, this guy never had a wife. Just the whole persona is a different persona. He could be a genius. Doesn't make a difference. It's a different reality. And often, because he's bereft to a certain degree, he needs that emotional upshoring. You can sense in him, he's an orphan. And once a person senses that weakness, that vulnerability, people naturally, unless you're special, people take advantage of it. And God says, and therefore I will take up that fight. And therefore will be very serious consequences. But once he has that sense of confidence, self-sufficient, and he can fend for himself, then he's no different than any other Jew. Although he is an orphan. Many years ago, there was a building on Lower East Side. There was a street, doesn't exist any longer. It was called Montgomery Street. Montgomery Street. And there was an old building there. And that building was a very sturdy building. It was about a 3-story building. And outside there was a stone plaque. And it said on it, Yeshivas Eitz Chaim. That was the name of the yeshiva. What was Yeshiva Eitz Chaim? When Rabbi Yitzchak Chonon began as a yeshiva, where there was no college, what they call REITs. Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Torah Seminary came into being. That was that building. They were originally on the Lower East Side, then they moved uptown. They moved to Washington Heights. The people who bought the building, they were Jews from Poland. It was called the Polish Shtibel. Shtibel in Yiddish is like, it's a room. That's where they pray. People came from the Polish background. They were what they came from Galicia. They weren't Hasidim necessarily. And they prayed. The building had many rooms. And they would rent out these rooms to various groups. And they had minyanim. So in this building, you could have had 8 other like shuls, but they weren't shuls, small groups of people having their own rabbi, and they would rent the various rooms. Each room has a capacity of maybe holding 50 people. But the ground floor was the ones who actually owned the building. That's where they had the library, they had everything. So in those days, in the 30s, you had people who were very poor, like today. But those days, many of the people who had nowhere to sleep were religious Jews. They'd come over. They were either widowers, or they never got married, or they were totally impoverished. So they used to sleep in the hallways and buildings because they were heated. We're talking about in the winter. And in this Polish shtibel, in the hallway, in the winter was heated, so they would sleep there. And in those days they called it a janitor, not a custodian. The janitor of this shtibel was a Polak. Polak means he was just from Polish background. We're talking about what a Polak was one time. He was really naturally like an anti-Semite, except he behaved himself because his employer were Jews, and he would take care of the building, clean it, and if he'd have any reason to hurt a Jew when he was keeping order, he would hurt the Jew. Okay? So you had all these poor people sleeping in the building in the winter because outside they'd freeze. And in those days, there was nobody to take care of them. And they were sleeping there. So the shamus of the shul was a cold-hearted guy, and he tells the Polak, I want you to take these people, put them out on the street in the winter. Okay? So the shamus represents his employer. It was his greatest pleasure. He takes these Jews, puts them out in the cold. They have no shelter. So my father told me, my grandfather, Over Shalom, saw this, and he says to the shamus, he says, what you're doing is the wrong thing. I mean, how could you be so cold-hearted, so cruel? These people have nothing. And the only thing, you're providing some warmth for them and put them out in the cold. I mean, they could die of hypothermia, not in the best health, these people. The shamus said, they don't belong here, let them put them out. So he says to me, he says to the shamus, he says, you realize this behavior doesn't go unseen. God notices your behavior. And someday you're going to pay the price. That's what he said to him. It comes New Year's, this Polak gets drunk. He's drunk. And all his feelings about Jews comes to the surface. Comes back to the building, and he's looking to beat up a Jew. Who does he find? He finds the shamus. And he has a stick, and he beats him. He beats the shamus. And he had to be hospitalized. You understand? God says, I will take up their fight. I will take, you mistreat my children, the bereft, the hope, the needy, the helpless, you're going to pay the price. As they say, whatever goes around comes around. You mistreat them, I will have you mistreated. And that's the way it is. And usually it plays out this way. Someday you pay the price. That's not the reason why you should be kind-hearted. You should be kind-hearted because it's the right thing to do, not because God's going to take revenge. But if you ever have a weak moment and you think you want to take advantage, remember, there's going to be a price to pay. It's not worth it for that reason. A human being, what is a human being? An intellectual animal, literally an animal, that drives the passions, the ego. It's out of control. So how do you take this person with tremendous potential and try to maximize on that potential? The animal has to be controlled. Now you have a bronco. Unless you break the bronco, you can't ride the bronco. Because it's a wild horse. It has to be broken. The only person who could break a person, which is called mentoring, we have to make choices in our life. We have to assume certain behavior patterns. But how do we know where to begin and where to end? We as Jews, we were given a script to live by. God gives a script. Every aspect of our life, God says exactly how to deal in that moment. When you rise, what do you do? When you eat, what do you do? What do you eat? How do you eat? When you engage in business, what are you permitted? What are you not permitted? Your time is not your time. You want to have a certain type of relationship. It's not permitted. Everything is you're mentored at every part of your life. It's not what you want to do. You do what God wants you to do. A person who's conditioned in such a manner, that person has full control over all his drives and inclinations. Because over his whole lifetime, he's been reining in, and he has control, and his intellect dictates not what is. The animal doesn't dictate. His passions don't dictate his life. We say a person's a slave of his desires. What does that mean? His desires are so overwhelming. As much as he understands, it's compromising opportunities. He says, unfortunately, I'm a slave of my desires. I can't pull myself out of that. It's like a person in quicksand that pulls him down. As much as you try to pull yourself out, just get pulled down further. And that's why people live their lives. Because most areas of the lives, that it's not a controlled area. Don't steal, don't murder, don't this. Every other area, you do what you want. A Jew, there's no such thing as you do what you want, ever in your lifetime. The seventh day comes, you have to behave a certain way. The weekday, you have to behave a certain way. You have to invest a certain amount of time. You have to be knowledgeable in God's script, and you have to study it, and you have to understand it. And you can't take things for granted, therefore you have to pray. And that's your obligation. And you have to every day acknowledge who God is by saying the Shema. And you have to wear a four-corner garment that it's tzitzis, which alludes to the 613 dictates of the Torah. I mean, wherever you turn, it's always within your purview. You see it. You can't put it out of your sight. Do you know what kind of gift this is? I'm a person I once gave a class at Shai Gold's office. I think Larry was there. And there was a person, he was an Israeli, he was a Sephardi, although he had an English name, he had an Ashkenazi name. His name was Reuben. That was his last name. And he owned a fleet of taxis when taxis had medallions. So it was taxi medallion one time was worth maybe $125,000. It was the medallion, it wasn't the car. And he was substantial, wasn't married, must have been then in his early 40s, comes to Scheigel's office. He was wearing a getup. If he would have looked like Gene Autry, it would have been Gene Autry. Maybe Roy Rogers, I'm not sure who. Jeans, cowboy boots, the shirt, a medallion, the shirt open till his chest, and the type of jacket he wore, and the haircut he had. And he sat and listened, spoke with a heavy Israeli accent. So after I finished giving the class, he says to me, so what does God want from us to be? A bunch of robots? To be robots? That's what he says to me. I said, what do you mean robots? He said, sure. Anything we do, we have to do the way he wants us to do it. We can't do what we want to do. He wants us to be robots. I said, let me ask you a question. I said, those shoes you're wearing, that you have to see a podiatrist every 2 weeks because that's how narrow the tips of those shoes are. Why are you wearing those cowboy boots? They're so comfortable. And those jeans you're wearing, designer jeans. And the way you walk with that sway, why are you walking that way? You know why? Because in society, body language says, if you go that way, dress that way, and talk that way, then you're on the end. You're way up there. So let me ask you a question. You know who you are? You're a robot of society. You're mimicking what society is telling you. If you want to be accepted, that's where you do it. Do you want to be a robot of society, or do you want to be a robot of God? Who do you want to direct you and mentor you and mold you? Society or God, where everything's in your best interest? And that's the reality. What do you have this kind of car? Because when you drive down the street with that and you put yourself foot on the gas, they hear you 6 blocks away. That's the reason. And this car only gets 5 miles a gallon when you're paying $28 a gallon. Why? You know why? It's worth it. Because when you drive this car, it's worth everything in the world, because everything's my ego. Everything's the way people value me. Does it really make a difference what people value? The moment you don't have 2 cents to your name, they won't even look at you. They won't give you a piece of bread. So what do you think they're valuing you? For you? Don't you realize you're a nothing? It's only because what you have. It's all fictitious. It's all packaging. When God gives you a script of life, you become that quality person. That's you. It's not something which you have. It's not the way you behave. This is what you become. That's the difference.